You're listening to the Cryptic Crew podcast. I'm your host, Mark Childers. Before we get started, if you've had an encounter or an experience or just something unexplained, click on our link tree in the description and share your encounter. Thank you for listening to the Cryptic Crew podcast.
The scream went for 3-4 seconds, and I know that when you're out in the woods, if you encounter a predator or anything, the last thing that you want to do is run.
You knew you weren't alone. Something was there. And I can't explain that.
I've never in my life heard anything like what I heard that night.
On this episode of the Cryptic Crew podcast, I'm super excited to have on author and speaker of all things high strangeness, especially Mothman, Steve Ward. Steve, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
But if you can, I tell you what, let's just kind of dive into this. Give our listeners a brief history of the legend of the Mothman.
Well, the first, not the first sighting, but the first major sighting occurred on November 15th, 1966. There were two couples, the Scarberrys and the Mallets, two married couples. They were driving around what the locals have called the TNT area for quite some time. It was, I believe, the West Virginia Ordnance Works back in the 40s when they were making explosives for the war effort. And if you look at the old black and white photographs, you'll see this huge complex of buildings and so forth. By the 1960s, most of those were gone. And they were driving by the old North Power Plant. And that was kind of a ruin. And they're driving down a dirt road. And this whole area had become kind of a lover's lane by this time. And so they were driving by the old North Power Plant. And Linda Scarberry was looking down the road, and she said, "What's that man doing standing in the middle of the road?" Well, that man spread his wings by about 10 feet. Turned out he had red glowing eyes, and it kind of shuffled off toward the power plant. And they decided to take off. Her then husband, Roger Scarberry, was driving. And they took off down Route 62 into Point Pleasant at a very high speed. This thing was chasing them, apparently. When they rounded the corner, they saw it standing by a road sign, a billboard. This thing was roughly humanoid, 6-7 foot tall, red glowing eyes, 10-foot wingspan, and kind of a dark or gray color. And so they don't know if it was the same creature or not. You know, some people think there was more than one. But anyway, it chased them into town. They went to the police department. They separated them, and they told their stories. If you go to the Mothman Museum, which is run by Jeff Walmsley, you can see their handwritten statements up on a display. And so that particular sighting hit the wire services all over the world. There was actually a sighting a few days before that. I'm not quite sure when it surfaced, but in Clendenin, West Virginia. 5 grave diggers were digging a grave, and one of the last surviving individual, Emil Gibson, he showed up at the Mothman Museum a few weeks ago, and he didn't even tell his story until a couple years ago to his family. But he was down in the grave digging. His companions were above the grave, and they saw this thing with this dark creature with wings and red glowing eyes come out of the woods. It was about November 12th, I believe. Now, he said he didn't actually see it because he was down in the grave. But when they pulled him out, he saw the looks on their faces, and he thought, man, they weren't kidding. So that was technically, you could call that the first sighting. And also before the sighting that chased the Scarberrys and the Mallets, there was an incident in, I'm going to lose the name of the town. but a man named Merle Partridge that was a couple hours away. And he saw some strange lights out in the field. Now, it has been reported sometimes as two red eyes, but it wasn't. Jeff Wansley interviewed him years later, and it was actually something kind of mechanical. But his dog went out and chased it, and he never saw his dog again. And so that was kind of associated with the Mothman phenomena because it happened at the same time. But that first major sighting with the Scarberries and the Mallets went everywhere. That's why when, as a young kid in junior high school in Michigan, I read about it in the newspaper. And it was even in the Stars and Stripes military newspaper. Jeff has collected all this stuff in the museum. There's great displays. There's 5 different documentaries going at the same time. So he's really, he grew up with it. He was 5 and 6 years old when the sighting started, and then when the bridge collapsed, which kind of culminated with all this. So, and then shortly after that, there's some other classic sightings. Marcella Bennett and her brother saw it. Actually out of the TNT area. They went to go visit a friend of theirs. They thought it was a big joke. They were just going to tap on the windows to scare them. They weren't there. They were leaving the house, and this thing rose up off the ground and startled Marcella so much that she dropped her infant child. Now, the child was okay, but it took her a few moments to gather herself together. She and her brother ran up on the porch and then got inside the house because the children were there. And this thing apparently walked back and forth across the porch. Of course, the police showed up too late. And then there were several other classic sightings early on. And that's kind of how it started. There's another a major one was Connie Carpenter. Now, I mentioned Roger Scarberry. Last summer, he came to Jeff. Now, they all gave initial reports over 50 years ago. But then Roger and so many of them just absolutely shut up. But last summer, Roger Scarberry came to Jeff and he said, you know what? I'm tired of people saying what happened to me. And, I know what happened. So he gave Jeff a long-form interview. I was in on part of it. Unfortunately, it's still under double secret probation. It's going to be in Jeff's next book. But also about the same time, this young lady I just mentioned, Connie Carpenter, she was only about 18 and still in school, but she was driving by the Mason County golf course, and she saw this, the same thing with red glowing eyes. It took off, flew over her car, and she had a case of conjunctivitis or eye burn, which often is associated with people that have a close encounter with a UFO. But she did not see a strange light in the sky. She saw this unusual creature or whatever it was. So that's kind of how it started. Now, John Keel, who wrote the book The Mothman Prophecies, he heard about this from his friend Gray Barker. Gray Barker was a big mover and shaker in the paranormal field and publishing industry in West Virginia. He was the first one to go down to investigate the Flatwoods Monster, if anybody remembers that incident back in 52. Yes. In Flatwoods, West Virginia. But Keel heard about it from him. He came down he lived on Long Island. He was a journalist. He'd been following the UFO phenomenon for years. He even saw a few of them when he was very young and when he was traveling in Egypt. And so he came down and interviewed some of the original witnesses. And so that's how he got started. And over that first year, 66 to 67, we kind of call it the year of the Garuda. And, the November 15th, 1966 to December 15th, 1967, that's the day the Silver Bridge collapsed that joined Point Pleasant and Ohio. So that's, again, and Keel interviewed a little over 100 witnesses. He came down about 5 different times that year. And most of them described, something very similar. There were a few that saw something like a big bird, the way they described it. But so that's generally how it started. And then you have the strange lights that were going overhead all the time. You have the Men in Black phenomenon. You have people that claimed animal mutilations, cattle mutilations. So it was a 3-ring circus of the paranormal.
Right. It sounds like there was a a plethora of sightings and just strange things that happened in that time period. And I even did a little bit of research even before the 60s. I guess they called them, they were Birdman sightings or some type of bird,
Yes.
creature of some sort.
James Gay Jones wrote a book called The Haunted Valley. And in there he talks about these strange Birdman sightings. They're a little bit further north up near the Elk River, Roane County, kind of that area. This happened around World War II. And supposedly people were seeing these large man birds in the sky with 12-foot wingspans, red plumage, and bald heads. And there's not much on that. I wish we had more information. But that preceded the Mothman sightings by quite some time. There's another really weird connection that may not be a connection at all. The Silver Bridge collapsed on December 15th, 1967. Well, there was a bridge collapse over the Elk River, but it happened well before these Birdman sightings, probably not connected. But the interesting thing is, I think it was 1904, this bridge collapsed, but it happened on December 15th.
Oh, wow.
Man, that is...
That's eerily strange.
It probably is a coincidence, but man, what a coincidence.
Right. Yes. I did not know about that. And that happened, where did that happen at?
It was over the Elk River. I don't remember exactly what town. A friend of mine named John Frick, who he and his brother, Tim, portray the Men in Black by day during the Mothman Festival, and they fly the Mothman by night during the Mothman Hayride. So John did some really good research, and he found that item about the bridge, the Elk River bridge collapsing on December 15th.
That's really interesting. Let me back up a second and let me ask you this: the statements the Mallets and the other couple made, were there any discrepancies between those statements? Since
not
they
really.
Were separated?
You can see some of them drew pictures of what they thought they saw, and the Mothman when they drew it looks just kind of like a 6 or 7 foot owl. I mean, its head or whatever, the eyes are kind of sunken down in the chest with the wings. Now, this thing, whatever this thing was definitely not an owl. But there wasn't any major discrepancies. Now, there was one of the early witnesses was Tom Urey. He did not see the Mothman per se. He saw a thunderbird. He saw a large bird following his convertible around that same time in the general area with a 10 to 12 foot wingspan. And he said, look, it was not an osprey. It was not this. He said, I would take a lie detector test on it. And it was misreported in the Mothman prophecies. I'm not sure if Keel made the mistake. Sometimes Keel was always complaining about the faceless editors and the way they would mess up his manuscripts. So, but anyway, Tom, when he's no longer with us, but when he would, Jeff Wamsley would have a few of the original witnesses there at a table people could talk to. And Tom never missed an opportunity to tell you that his sighting was reported incorrectly in the Mothman prophecies.
Gotcha. Yeah. Also, you went back to the bird sighting. There have been some, I guess, that somebody had called in, maybe some biologist or whatnot, decades ago, and mentioned a sandhill crane, but that just does not fit the other witness reports, does it?
No, you can look in the Mothman Museum. They have Jeff has some of those clippings of the learned scientists saying that it had to be a sandhill crane or a large owl, and it's kind of laughable. It's the typical. I'm trying to remember John Keel in one of his books, Strange Creatures from Time and Space. He talked about Type A scientists and Type B scientists. And one of them was employed by a university, and one was I forget the distinction. But what they would come out with these learned statements that were just absolute nonsense. And he gives the example. I wish I could remember the guy's name, but remember when they discovered the coelacanth, the fish that was they thought was extinct for 60 million years. Well, they were catching it off the South Africa or what? Anyway, they were catching.
That's correct. Yes.
Live fish. And so this one scientist that Keel quotes said, now this is quite impossible because we know that there's been extinct for millions of years, and it's a deep water fish and so forth. And then 10 years later, after they discovered it, that same scientist said, we've always expected this to be discovered because, and he was wrong. It was a shallow water fish. It wasn't a deep water fish. So
Right.
just talking out of both sides of his mouth.
Yeah, they're not always right, and there's so much, I think there's just so much other things to discover as well, so.
Oh, sure.
Steve, let me ask you this. On most of the witness statements that you've seen or heard, have they been pretty consistent? As far as description of the creature.
But it's good you brought that up because the behavior is not consistent. Some people saw it take off straight up like a helicopter without flapping its wings. Now, it did flap its wings at times, but that doesn't make any sense. There was a lot of people, John Keel discovered this, and another researcher named Franzen, a Swedish researcher that followed Keel in a year or two later. And he had corresponded with John Keel. And they both found that many of the people that had a sighting of this creature, of this whatever it was, sometimes I even say apparition, had an outbreak of poltergeist phenomena when they got home for a period of time. How do we reconcile that? There was a couple people had missing time. There was Keel references an incident where a prominent person in the town, and you find out later he was a banker. He heard something. He went out to his porch. He sees this thing standing there, classic Mothman, and he loses 10 or 20 minutes, just kind of in a trance. And then it flies away. No idea what happened there. There's another lady, Linda Sigmund, who is still very much with us and a friend of mine. She has a book out called, and I always mess up the title, In the Pale Moonlight, something like that. But it talks about her experience. She was 12 years old. This was April of 1967, about 12 miles north of Point Pleasant. And she and her boyfriend were sitting on the hood of their car, just watching the stars. They saw a strange light moving through the sky. That went away. And then they saw something else that I think that looked a little more solid. He decided to get out of there. She wanted to see it and stay. So he's driving away. She's looking outside the window, and she sees this, I guess the Mothman or a shadow, like the Mothman flying next to this light. And when they got home, they found out they were missing a couple hours of time. So, it presents a paradox. Keel thought it left some kind of weird-looking footprints by the Old North Power Plant when he went out there. But nobody actually saw it leave them. So it did seem to be physical at some times, more like an apparition, perhaps paraphysical. But how do you explain the poltergeist phenomena? How do you explain the missing time? It was seen a few times in conjunction with a strange light, but Keel did not like to call these things extraterrestrial. He thought that whatever this was a natural condition of the planet. And so he used the term ultra-terrestrial, just to kind of get away from that idea that these things are necessarily off-world. And it's interesting. He said he borrowed that term from the great Ivan Sanderson. I don't know if you're familiar with his writings. He was a British naturalist. He lived in New Jersey, friend and colleague of John Keel. And he wrote great books on the unexplained and the unknown.
Right. Yeah, the book you had mentioned Linda wrote is called Beyond the Pale Moonlight, UFO Mothman Encounter.
Yes, and she even had a Man in Black encounter.
And I'm glad you brought that up. What do you think, or who are they? Is it? And I've heard it more than just in Mothman incidents. Matter of fact, on a previous episode we had talked about that with I'm gonna call it quote unquote a dogman type encounter.
Okay.
And they show up unmarked vehicles and
right.
So forth, and you don't know who they are, but they take over a scene, or they take over the property or what have you, and I guess maybe intimidate or try to get you to tell you that you did not see something. So what do you think they are?
Well, there's more than one answer to the Men in Black. I mean, sometimes I think you're just probably dealing with misidentification. Mary Heyer, a friend and colleague of John Keel, the reporter that went with him to some of these areas to watch the strange lights, she had some strange visitors that kind of fall under that category. You know, it's possible, as you know, in this realm, the paranormal UFOs, it does attract some oddballs. So once in a while, somebody that might just be a little bit off might show up, and it might be misidentified with something stranger than it really is. But John, one time, I mentioned in the Mothman Prophecies, John Keel's in town, and he's noticing all these guys. They're in black suits, skinny ties, close cropped hair. And he says to Mary, "What's going on? Is there a convention or something in town?" And she says, "I don't know. I noticed them too." And he tried to engage one in conversation. I think they were probably just feds, FBI men kind of snooping around. But there have been some very odd cases where people are told to not talk about their UFO sighting, or they get photographs confiscated. There was even a wave of people dressed like Air Force officers. And there was a missive sent out from the Air Force saying, look, there's people out there identifying themselves as Air Force officers, and we did not send them out, and they're confiscating photographs and so forth. There's actually, I don't have the number on the memo, but that was something that went out several decades ago. There was one of the most bizarre reports. A woman named Jenny Randles wrote a great book called The Truth Behind the Men in Black. By the way, Nick Redfern has also written some good books on the Men in Black. But she wrote about a woman in England that saw a UFO. And then one night, a couple of men that came to the door that seemed like they were from the government. And they were interviewing her. And one man was firing questions at her, and she's very distraught. And they weren't particularly revealing questions. And so Jenny Randles got the idea later on. She said, well, why don't we put this young woman under hypnosis just to see if we can see something that's missed. So they did that. And when she, gave the report under hypnosis, she said, the one man was firing questions at her verbally. In between, the other one seemed to be firing questions at her telepathically.
Oh, wow.
Neither set of questions made much sense. It was just a bizarre incident, but she's, repeating this under hypnosis. Just recently, I read a book by a friend of mine, Chad Lewis. It's about the mysterious things going on in the Lake Superior. And in one of his chapters, he talks about how he gave a lecture about, the mysteries in Minnesota. And he was approached by a woman that had seen a classic sort of a flying saucer over Lake Superior. And she was not interested in UFOs, but she thought, I want to get home and tell my son about this because he's fascinated by it. She goes out to the parking lot. She sees two guys dressed in dark suits with, black fedoras, and they're talking about the UFO. She says, she thought they must have seen it. And their demeanor was just very odd. So she thought, I'm getting out of here. And as she was about to leave, she was told it would be wise if you don't talk about your sighting. Wow. So there are incidents like that, and I just don't know what to make of them.
Right. Yeah. The talking about the Lake Superior area, I had a gentleman on, a friend of mine, just recently, John Billman, and he's investigating the Kinross incident.
Oh, okay.
Which happened in the 50s, where Air Force jet was going to intercept an unidentified flying object, and they merged together, and only one of them showed back up on the radar, and the jet was never found.
A man named John Tinney, who's a lecturer and author, investigated that incident, and he was able to that man's widow had never gotten his pension. They just kind of left it, but somehow John got it so that she got all the back pay her missing husband was due. and he even got something in a cemetery or some kind of a monument where, and I'm going to paraphrase this horribly, but it gives his name and it says this man died while defending the earth from aliens or something like that.
Yes, it has.
But the bottom line is he got that woman, due to his efforts, the money she deserved.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, the headstone or the footstone says that. It talks, John mentioned it actually, because he went to, I believe it's in Louisiana, I believe. And he saw it. It has something about a UFO incident or died from chasing a UFO or something like that on there.
Right, right. So how cool, not cool that this poor man has been missing and we don't know what happened.
Right.
But, how cool is it that finally there was some justice?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I was going to go back to Mary Heyer. She was one of the first, she was a local reporter, if I'm not mistaken, and one of the first to investigate that, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, she had a column called Where the Waters Mingle, which refers to the Ohio River and the Kanawha. They intersect right there in Point Pleasant. And she, in that column, she talked about the UFO sightings, Mothman sightings, Men in Black. And one of these creepy guys, Men in Black types, came in to her office and said, what would you say if somebody told you to stop printing UFO reports? And she said, I'd tell them to go to hell. So that ended that conversation. But she and John and other people would go out to a particular area. And I think some of us have found one of the areas that he used to go to. It was south of Point Pleasant and Gallipolis Ferry. And the reason they went down there, that the place is pretty, there's a lot of people that live down there now, but there's a lot of open space down there. I can't imagine what it was like a half a century ago. But they went down there because in the TNT area, it was so crowded. People were just lining up, and you even had people in there with their rifles and bow and arrows, thinking they were going to bag themselves a Mothman, which wasn't very likely.
Right, right. We did a poll, or I did a poll on one of the social media outlets I use. It's been just a little while back, and 64% voted the Mothman is real, and then 16% saying misidentified. And so that would have put it at about 80, and then I guess the other 20% was not real. But
I'm very cautious. Even one time I was on a podcast, and I usually do what I did here. I go through the different experiences people had. And there was one more I should tell you about. A man named Reverend Gray, who's featured on one of Small Town Monsters documentaries, The Mothman of Point Pleasant. He and his wife were missionaries, and they were due to go to to some far off country the next day. This is just when the Mothman stuff started. They hadn't even seen it in the newspaper. Well, they're in their bedroom, and this thing manifests. A classic Mothman manifests, 6-7 foot tall, red glowing eyes and wings, and that it dissipated it and it just vanished. And in their context, they looked at it as something perhaps demonic, which you might understand.
Right.
But see, they went away the next day. It wasn't until a few years later they came back. They saw the old newspapers and they thought, my God, that's what we saw in our bedroom. So I told somebody once, this thing, maybe it's an elemental. And then I said, don't ask me what an elemental is, because I'm not really sure. But it's almost like something, it's not even just paraphysical. It's just very hard to wrap your head around it,
Right. That's extremely strange. Yeah, that makes it sound like it is something that could be evil or demonic, in that category.
I tend, in my, people can disagree. I think John Keel looked at a lot of this stuff as being kind of negative. I think he fell short of thinking it was demonic, but nevertheless, I think a lot of these manifestations, these experiences, may have given rise to some of our beliefs in demons and the negative aspects of this. But there's a positive side to a lot of this. Preston Dennett wrote a book about something called 300. encounters with UFO pilots where people have had healings and have been helped or sort of protected in an angelic fashion. So you get this yin and yang. You get this the two poles, negative and positive, and it
Right.
just it makes it harder and harder to try and figure out what is behind all this.
Sure. Yeah. It's hard to wrap your head around. That's from one end of the spectrum to the other, actually, you know.
So do you wonder why do we keep doing this?
Yes.
since it's so elusive.
I know. I guess it's the mystery of it. It keeps us going. Steve, tell us about the Mothman Festival and what time of year it is, and then what goes on. You know, a little.
Well, the festival, they have it every third weekend in September. So this year it falls on September 20th and 21st. It's held in downtown Point Pleasant. Thousands of people flow through here. Hard to find parking and places to stay. Up and down Main Street, you've got food vendors, T-shirts, and all kinds of sellers on the perpendicular street where the Mothman statue is. The speakers, which are take place up in the church on the north end of town, the Trinity Methodist Church. They have a nice venue there. The speakers have their tables by the Mothman statue. They're very accessible. Their books are there. Very interesting people. Jeff Walmsley always has quite a roster of different speakers. Ken Gerhard's going to be there this year. Bigfoot and cryptid specialist. Richard Haddam, that wrote the screenplay for the Mothman Prophecies, will be there. Ron Lanham and Joe Perdue of Wild and Weird West Virginia. Great guys that do a lot of.
I'm a fan of their show. Yes.
Yeah, good investigation. They will be there. I always speak at the last speaker on Sunday at 2 p.m. I always joke when everybody's driving home, but I'll be speaking about the high strangeness aspects of the Loch Ness Monster. So anyway, Jeff's always got a wide variety of speakers, and on Saturday and Sunday. But here's the thing people have to remember. What you want to do is if you can, the only thing that costs money there is the entrance to the museum part, not the front part where the T-shirts are. And it's hard to get in during the festival. That's one of my cats. This cat, by the way, his name is Keel.
Keel, interesting.
And the only other thing that costs money, of course, the food and T-shirts and all the goods, is the Mothman Hayride. We take people into the dreaded T&T area Saturday night. We meet out at the Farm Museum. There's 3 tractors, 3 carts, and 2 of the carts are like proper hay rides with bales of hay. They usually give me the old man cart with the nice, comfortable seats. We take people into the T&T area. The men in black try to turn you away with their bullhorns. I tell people, look, they're more like the Keystone Cops than the men in black. So you go into this creepy area, and I go in a few days ahead of time and try and set up some, big rubber spiders and creatures I cobbled together with eyes lit up with indicator lights, and just a few creepy crawlies for like a Halloween hayride. But the big attraction is there is a guaranteed flyover of the Mothman complete with red glowing eyes and sound effects.
That's
so
awesome.
It's really it's just really a lot of fun. But you have to stand in line to get your ticket in the morning, and they do sell out. And we take people till about 11 or midnight. Keep taking them out in this area of it's called the McClintock Wildlife Area now, which sounds more benign, but it's still pretty creepy.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. Something I would enjoy doing for sure. Well, Steve, I have really enjoyed having you on and having a conversation with you about all the high strangeness in that area. And is there anything coming up that you would like to mention besides? Well,
I do have a book for sale called Mothman High Strangeness, co-authored with Mark Randall. Mark Randall's a great graphic artist. It covers the year of the Garuda, the year of the Mothman, and he and I wrote the pieces for it. He did all the great artwork. That's available through Amazon. The following weekend, I'm going to be out in Iowa for the Van Meter Visitor Festival. Now, the Van Meter Visitor was sort of a pterodactyl-like creature with some very strange properties that showed up in 1903 in Van Meter, Iowa, which is just west of Des Moines. So, like I say, I'll be the MC out there. I sometimes speak out there. They've got another great lineup of speakers. And so that's, and right now, if you could see my front room, I have all kinds of monsters sitting on my couch with wires and indicator lights, and I can barely move. What I do is, this coming Tuesday, I'll hit the ground running for a few days and try and set up all these giant spider webs and monsters and so forth, and get them ready for the Mothman hayride.
Awesome. I will put a link down in the description for Mothman, High Strangeness, your book. And Steve, like I said, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and maybe we can sit down and do a part 2 sometime. And
absolutely.
And go into some other things as well. So, and for the listeners, if you've had a strange encounter, something unexplained, email us at thecrypticcrewpodcast@gmail.com. Please like, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel out. Thank you for listening, and God bless.